The deepest chains a man ever wears are the ones he swore to. He calls them loyalty. He calls them family. He calls them love. And he cannot feel under the weight of them that a bond which will not let you leave was never love at all.
Put your hand on the center of your chest for a moment, over the heart, and notice what is there, because for most men what is there is not softness, it is armor. There is a plating over the heart of a grown man, a guard he put up so long ago he has forgotten it is a guard, and underneath it there is something that aches in a way he cannot name and does not have time for. That is the seat we are working in this hour, the heart, the center of the body, the place a man was built to be joined to other souls. And the deception that has been sitting on it is one of the heaviest a man carries, because it does not feel like a deception. It feels like loyalty, it feels like duty, it feels like the bonds that make him who he is. So let me describe the symptom, and you tell me, in the privacy where no one is keeping score, whether you know it. There are people in your life you are bound to, and the bond does not feel like freedom, it feels like weight. There is the relationship you cannot leave and cannot be fully alive inside, the one held together now by history and obligation and the fear of what leaving would cost, long after the love went quiet. There is the family tie that runs entirely on guilt, the call you make from duty and dread instead of desire, the holiday you attend like a man reporting for a sentence. There is the friend, the partner, the group, the cause, that you stay loyal to, not because your heart is in it, but because some oath you cannot quite remember, swearing says that leaving would make you a traitor. And there is the grievance, the old one, the blood you feel is owed to you, the wound you have nursed for years because somewhere you came to believe that to put it down would be to let them win. Or it shows up as the opposite shape, which is the same wound wearing different clothes. Some men do not stay in the hostage bonds, they flee them. They keep everyone at arm's length and call it independence. They are the friend who is always a little unreachable, the man who has 100 acquaintances and no one who has seen him cry, the husband who is present in the house and absent in the chest, who provides everything and gives nothing, who learned somewhere that to need a person is to hand them a knife. He is not free either. He is just bound on the other side of the same bar, bound by the vow never to be bound, which is its own kind of chain, and just as lonely, and in some ways lonelier, because at least the hostage knows he is held. The man who has sworn never to be held is alone in a way he cannot even name, surrounded by people, untouched by any of them, and calling the numbness peace. All of that lives in the chest, and you can feel it there if you stop and look. The armor over the heart, the tightness of love withheld and love demanded, the low heat of a resentment that has been burning so long it feels like part of your body temperature, and underneath all of it, walled in behind the plating, is the thing the whole apparatus was built to protect and has instead imprisoned, which is your actual capacity to be joined to another human being in freedom and not in bondage. We are going to reach that walled-in thing in this hour. But first I have to show you the oath the armor was built around, and the mountain where it was first sworn, because the chains on your heart did not begin with your family or your marriage or your wound. They are far older than that, and the shape of them was set long before you were born. There is a story the old texts keep, and it is the founding story of this entire deception, and almost everyone who tells the Watcher accounts rushes past it to get to the dramatic parts, the giants and the forbidden arts. But the very first thing the Watchers did, before they taught a single art, before they took a single wife, before they touched the earth at all, was swear an oath. The Book of Enoch is precise about it. 200 of them gathered on the height of Mount Hermon, and before they descended into what they were about to do, they bound themselves to one another with a mutual oath, a blood pact, an agreement that they would all do the thing together, so that no one of them could ever afterwards stand apart from it and claim he had not consented. They made themselves accomplices on purpose. They wove themselves into a single guilt on purpose, so that the guilt itself would hold them together, so that no one could betray the others without exposing himself.
Understand how cold and how brilliant that is. They could have descended as individuals, each free to turn back, each able to repent alone and walk away from the others. Instead, they bound themselves so that turning back became impossible, so that the only way out for any one of them was to destroy all of them, which meant there was no way out at all. They made their own conscience into a weapon pointed at each other. They made sure that the moment any one of them felt the pull to return to the light, the others would have everything they needed to ruin him and he them. That is the mutual hostage, and it is the most stable prison ever designed, because it needs no walls and no guards. It needs only each prisoner to be the jailer of the others. No one escapes, because everyone is everyone else's lock. Hear what that is, because it is the first piece of technology the Watchers ever deployed, before metal, before potions, before the painting of the face. It is the principle that mutual implication binds a group together, the shared crime, the blood oath, the mutual hostage, the idea that the strongest possible bond between people is not love and is not loyalty freely given, but a shared transgression that makes them all unable to leave, because to leave is to betray, and to betray is to be destroyed by the very ones you betrayed. And once you see that principle, you will see it running underneath every dark brotherhood that has ever existed on this earth. Every secret society initiates with a shared secret or a shared act precisely because the secret is the leash. Every gang bloods its members because the blood is the bond that cannot be cut without death. Every cult binds its people with a confession or a compromise it holds over them forever. The mafia, the cartel, the conspiracy, the inner ring
I wrote about who you were built to be in the chapter on the compassion itself, and here is the truth the oath was installed to bury. You were built to be a lover, not in the small sense but in the deep sense, a man built for connection, for communion, for the joining of his soul to other souls, in a bond that makes both of them more alive and more free. The lover is the part of a man that can be genuinely joined to another and lose nothing of himself in the joining, that can love without merging into a puddle and without gripping the other in a fist, that can stay open. That is a holy capacity, maybe the holiest a man carries, because it is the one that most resembles the God who is himself a communion of love. And the deepest theft of the oath is that it counterfeits this holy capacity with a violent imitation. It offers a man bondage in the place of bonding, the leash in the place of the open hand, the mutual hostage in the place of the free covenant. And a man who takes the counterfeit spends his whole life chained to people he cannot leave while starving for a closeness he has never once felt. Because you cannot be truly close to someone you are not free to leave. And the lover carries a contract, and the old framework names it the contract of relationships. Hear it rightly. The contract of relationships is the agreement a man holds about what a bond between two people actually is, and there are only two ways to hold it. You can hold relationship as a living field, a thing that is alive between two free people, renewed each day by choice, breathing, growing, able to change. Or you can hold relationship as a transaction, a ledger of debts and obligations, a set of terms enforced by guilt, a contract in the cold legal sense where each party is bound by what they owe and held by what it would cost to default. The oath only works on a man who has signed the second contract. It can only chain you to people through guilt and blood debt if you have first come to believe that love is a transaction, that bonds are enforced rather than chosen, that the way you keep someone is by making it too expensive for them to leave. And most men sign that contract so early they cannot remember signing it. They simply learned in a childhood home where love came with conditions and leaving came with punishment, that this is what a bond is, a debt you cannot discharge and cannot walk away from. And they have been loving that way and being loved that way ever since. And here is where it goes deeper than any brotherhood and any family, into the place most men have never once looked, because the oath does not only bind a man to other people. The deepest oaths a man carries are the ones he swore to himself, somewhere back in the wreckage of a childhood, in a moment when the bond that was supposed to hold him failed, when the love he reached for turned out to be a hostage arrangement or a slammed door. A boy stood in the rubble of that and did the only thing a powerless child can do. He swore an oath. He did not write it down, and he could not have spoken it, but his whole body swore it, and it went something like this: never again. Never again will I need anyone the way I needed them. Never again will I let anyone that close. Never again will I be the one who reaches and finds no hand. I will not be that soft again. I will not be that exposed again. I will armor this and keep it armored. And I will never, as long as I live, let what happened to me then happen to me again. That is the inner oath, and it is the most binding oath a man ever takes. And he took it to protect a heart that had no other protection. So do not despise it. Honor it the way you honor every wound-born vow that kept a child alive. But understand what it does once the child becomes a man. The inner oath plates the heart shut from the inside. It is the actual mechanism of the armor. Every hostage bond you endure and every real bond you flee is downstream of that private vow, because a man who has sworn never to be that vulnerable again cannot enter a free covenant, since a free covenant requires exactly the vulnerability he swore off, and so he is left with only the counterfeits, the chain or the severed cord, bondage or isolation, the two options the field allows. The man does not know he is still keeping a vow he swore at 7. He thinks he is simply being careful, being strong, being realistic about people.
he is keeping an oath, and until it is named and renounced, it will run his heart for the rest of his life, faithfully, exactly as he swore it would, keeping out the very thing he has been starving for since the day he swore to live without it. And here is what it cost you in the body, where every real cost is paid. It cost you the heart, the seat of the lover, the center of the chest where a man is meant to feel his connection to others as a warm and open current. When the heart is sound, a man can let love flow out and let love flow in. He can be moved, he can be touched, he can be near another soul without armor and without grasping. But under the oath, the heart does not stay open, it plates over, because an open heart in a world of hostage bonds gets used, gets bound, gets made to pay debts it never agreed to. So the man armors the heart to survive the very bonds that were supposed to nourish it, and the armor works, the way all the deceptions work. It keeps him from being destroyed by the counterfeit love, and the cost is that it also keeps out the real thing. He becomes a man with a guarded heart, who can perform connection but cannot quite feel it, who is surrounded by bonds and starving for communion, whose chest aches with a loneliness that makes no sense to him because he is not alone. He is bound on every side, and that is exactly the problem. And the bound heart swings, the way every shadow swings, between the two faces of the same wound. One season it merges, it clings, it rescues, it overgives, it pours itself out, trying to earn a love it does not believe it can simply receive. It disappears into the other person and calls the disappearing devotion. Then the resentment builds, because overgiving always builds resentment, and it swings to the other face. It controls, it withdraws, it punishes with silence, it weaponizes the very care it was pouring out. It grips the other in a fist and calls the grip love. Merge and control, rescue and resent, cling and punish. Back and forth across the years, the same heart that never learned the third thing, the only real thing, which is to stand on its own ground and love another from freedom rather than from need. He is bound and not joined. He is held and not loved. He has people who would not let him leave and no one who has truly arrived. He has a full calendar of obligations and an empty chest. And the ache he feels is not the ache of a man with too few bonds. It is the stranger and more disorienting ache of a man with too many of the wrong kind, surrounded, claimed, accounted for, and unmet, which is a loneliness the lonely cannot understand, and that the bound man cannot explain to anyone, because from the outside his life is full of love. It is full of bonds. It is only that none of them are free, and a bond that is not free is not the thing the heart was crying out for. It is the counterfeit of it, and the heart knows the difference even when the man does not, and goes on aching behind the armor for a closeness it has never once been allowed to feel. Now I have to name the field that keeps the oath in force, and you will feel the shape of how I do it. There is a power the old texts name over this seat, and the instant I name it your imagination will reach for a monster, and the monster is the camouflage. The field is not a monster. It is a field, a weather in the heart of a man and in the heart of a people, and it does to the bond what the other fields do to the ground and the fire and the will. The old texts name it Azazel, and Azazel is one more of the archons, one more of the ruling powers the Gnostics learned to name. And over the heart, Azazel governs not through hatred in the obvious sense, but through something far more respectable, the field of wrath, the spirit of grievance and blood debt, and the vengeance that feels like justice.
Hear what wrath actually is in this old and precise sense, because it is not the hot flash of anger that rises and passes. That kind of anger is clean. It is information. It tells a man a boundary has been crossed, and then it goes. Wrath is something else. Wrath is anger that has been kept, nursed, fed, built into a permanent structure in the chest, a grievance that has hardened into an identity, And the field of wrath does its deepest work by presenting itself as justice. That is the whole art of it. The man caught in it does not feel like a captive of bitterness. He feels like a man who has been wronged and is righteously holding the line, who is owed, who is simply refusing to let the guilty off the hook. Wrath presents itself as justice. Sit with that because it is the entire disguise. The grievance feels like dignity. The refusal to forgive feels like strength. The blood debt you are keeping feels like the only thing honoring the wound that was done to you. And all the while the wrath is not touching the one who hurt you, it is sitting in your chest, burning, plating your heart shut, keeping the old wound open on purpose, because a closed wound cannot collect a debt, and so the field keeps the wound open forever in the name of a justice that never arrives. And this is the cruelty folded into it. The field of wrath chains you to the very person you are trying to make pay. The man who cannot forgive is not free of his enemy. He is bound to him more tightly than love ever bound anyone, because he carries the one who wronged him everywhere, rehearses him, feeds him, gives him a permanent residence in the chest. The blood debt is a hostage arrangement that runs in only one direction. He thinks he is holding the other man hostage to the debt. The truth is, the debt is holding him, and the field grows fat on the burning, harvesting the heat of a wound kept open across years, sometimes across whole generations, because wrath is patient, and it loves nothing more than a grievance a father can hand down to a son. And that handing down is the field's masterpiece, because a grievance inherited is a grievance no one even chose. A debt a man is born already owing, a war he was conscripted into before he could speak. Whole families run on it, whole peoples, whole histories. A wound done so long ago that not one living soul remembers the first blow, only that the blood is owed and must be collected. And so sons take up the wrath of fathers they are nothing like, against enemies they have never met, for injuries they never suffered, and call it honor, and call it justice, and feed the field with lives that could have been free. You may be carrying one right now that is not even yours, a coldness toward a whole kind of person, a grievance that arrived in you already formed, a debt you have been collecting on behalf of someone who has been dead for years. That is wrath handed down, and the field counts on you never asking whether the war you are fighting was ever yours to begin with. A field needs thrones, and Azazel has built thrones across the human world wherever bonds are enforced by blood and guilt and grievance instead of offered in love. There is the throne of the blood feud, the vendetta that runs down the generations, the families and the tribes and the nations that have been killing each other for so long that no one alive remembers the first wound, only that the debt must be paid forever in blood, because to stop would be to betray the dead. There is the throne of the dark brotherhood in all its forms, the gang, the secret society, the cult, the inner ring, every bond sealed with a shared transgression that makes leaving a death sentence. There is the throne of the family bound by guilt, the home where love was always a debt and obligation was always the leash, handed down so faithfully that the children grow up and build the same hostage bonds with their own children and never once suspect there was another way. And there is the newest throne, the one the field has built in our own age and is feeding on right now, the great grievance engine of the screen, the platforms engineered to gather the wounded into mobs, to take 1,000,000 private resentments and fuse them into one roaring field of collective wrath, to give every man an enemy to hate and a tribe to be bound to in the hating, so that strangers who would have nothing to do with one another are welded into a single furious body by a shared grievance against a shared enemy. The ancients had a word for what moves through a mob like that. They would not have called it an opinion. They would have called it a spirit, and they would have meant that something with a pattern and an appetite was moving through all those wounded hearts at once, binding them with the oldest technology there is, the bond of shared blood debt,
and feeding on the heat. And there is a more intimate throne the field loves even more than the mob, the one it builds inside a single relationship. You have seen it, maybe you have lived it, the bond that should have ended long ago and somehow cannot. The two people who wound each other and cannot leave each other, whose fighting and reconciling have fused into a single cycle that feels more like life than peace ever did. The world has a clean modern name for it now, the trauma bond, and it is the Watcher's oath built for two, a hostage arrangement disguised as a great love, held together not by covenant, but by the shared wounds, the shared history, the shared crimes against each other that neither can walk away from without facing everything they spent and lost. The field adores that one because it can run for decades on the heat of two people who mistake the intensity of their captivity for the depth of their love. So let me name the counterfeit all the way through, because a thing named in full loses the power it only held in the dark. Underneath the entire deception is a need, and the need is holy. The need is connection. You were made for communion, made to be joined to other souls, made to belong, and a man with no need to belong is not free. He is amputated, cut off from the deepest thing he was built for. The need is right. You are right to long to be bound to others, to belong somewhere, to be held by people and to hold them. There is no weakness in the longing. It is the image of God in you, who is himself a bond of love. But the need is a doorway, and two things can come through it. The hunger for connection can be met in true covenant, the free bond between free people, love offered and love returned, a joining that makes both more alive and that each is free to leave and chooses every day to keep. Or it can be captured by the field and routed into the counterfeit, and the counterfeit is the oath, the hostage bond, belonging enforced by guilt and grievance and blood debt, the chain that calls itself loyalty. And the counterfeit is built so close to the real thing that a man can spend his whole life inside the chains and never once suspect that the warmth he keeps reaching for was always on the other side of them. The counterfeit says, you belong because you cannot leave. The truth says, you belong because you are free to leave, and you stay. Here is the turn, and the betrayal that waits at the threshold of the heart comes, like the one at the seat of fire, from two directions at once, and they herd a man between them. From one side comes the voice of the field itself, the voice of the oath, and it says bind. It says the way to keep love is to chain it, to make leaving impossible, to bind the other to you with guilt and history and need, so that they can never go, and to bind yourself the same way, because a bond that can be left is a bond that is not safe. That is the first lie. Hold love by making it a prison. And from the other side comes a voice that sounds like its wholly opposite, and it is the voice this audience has heard 1,000 times from the Gnostic teachers and the higher consciousness guides, and it says detach. It says that attachment itself is the suffering, that other people are part of the prison, that the bonds of the heart are just more chains binding the divine spark to the world of matter, and that the path is up and out, beyond attachment, beyond need, beyond the messy entanglements of love, into a serene and solitary enlightenment where nothing can touch you because you have let go of everyone. That is the second lie. Escape the prison of love by needing no one. And here is what almost no one sees. The two lies are the same lie. They share one root. Both of them agree that love as God designed it, free covenant between free souls, is not actually possible, that the only options are the chain or the severed cord, bondage or isolation, the hostage bond or the lonely spark ascending alone. The binder and the detacher are not opposites. They are two employees of the same field, and the field does not care which one you choose because both deliver the same prize, a man who cannot do the one thing his heart was built for. which is to be freely and fully joined to another soul. One man chains the heart shut, the other man cuts it loose to float away. Neither one is home in the bond, and Azazel feeds equally well on both, on the man strangling in his hostage loves, and on the man frozen in his enlightened solitude, because both have given up on the only thing that would actually free them, which is covenant.
And see how perfectly each lie fits a different wound, because that is always how the field works. To the man whose wound made him cling, it sells the chain. It whispers that he must hold tighter, bind harder, make himself indispensable, never give them a reason or a way to go. And to the man whose wound made him flee, the very same field sells the opposite teaching, dressed in robes of light. It whispers that attachment is beneath him, that the evolved soul needs no one, that his inability to stay is not a wound but an awakening. The clinger is told to bind, the fleer is told to transcend, and both are being managed by the same hand, herded away from the one country neither has ever been allowed to enter, the open ground in the middle where two free people choose each other daily and are free to stop and do not. Now hear the truth that breaks both fences at once, because it is the place where this work parts ways with every Gnostic who ever taught detachment, and every wounded heart that ever learned to bind. The answer to the counterfeit blood oath is not isolation, and it is not a better chain. The answer to the counterfeit blood oath is a true one, because there was a blood bond sworn that does the exact opposite of the Watcher's oath, and it is the center of the faith the Gnostic flees. The Watchers swore a blood oath that bound men through their shared guilt, that held them by making betrayal fatal, that chained them in their transgression forever. And then, in the fullness of time, the God those Watchers had betrayed swore a blood covenant of his own, and it ran in the opposite direction in every way. The Watcher's oath bound men by their guilt. The new covenant frees men from their guilt. The Watcher's oath was sealed with the blood of victims, the blood of the children, and the wars it spawned. The new covenant was sealed with the blood of the one who refused to make anyone else pay, who took the entire blood debt of the world into his own body and discharged it, so that the cycle of vengeance that the field had run for all of history could finally stop, not by one more payment in blood, but by a payment that ended the ledger. The Watcher's oath says you cannot leave or you will be destroyed. The new covenant says you are free and you are loved, and you may come and go as a son and not as a hostage, and you stay because you are held by love and not by debt. That is the difference that changes everything, and you can feel it in the body if you hold the two side by side. Under the Watcher's oath, you stay because the cost of leaving would destroy you. Under the covenant, you stay because the love is real, and you would not want to be anywhere else, and you know the whole time that the door is open. The open door is the proof. A bond with no exit is a cell, however much affection decorates it. A bond with an open door that you walk through every morning back into the arms of the one you have chosen, that is the thing your heart was built for, and it is the thing the field has spent your whole life convincing you was naive, or impossible, or already lost. It is not lost. It was only buried under the oaths, behind the armor, waiting for a man brave enough to believe that a love he is free to leave could be the strongest bond of all. That is the bond the heart was always aching for under all its armor. Not the chain and not the severed cord, but the free covenant, the blood bond that liberates instead of imprisons, modeled on the one who showed that the highest love is the love that lays itself down and demands no hostage in return. And this is why the work is somatic, why I will not let you make this an idea, because the breaking of the oath happens in the chest, in the literal heart, when a man finally lets the armor come down, not into the helpless merging the field calls love, and not into the frozen solitude the Gnostic calls freedom, but into the open, undefended, freestanding posture of a heart that can be joined and is not afraid,
because it knows it is held by a covenant that no betrayal can break and no leaving can threaten. There is a virtue the old framework sets against the field of Azazel, and like all the others, it is not what a captive heart would guess. The corrective for the man bound in hostage loves and burning grievances is not more loyalty, and it is not more detachment. It is patience, and patience is not passive endurance. It is not gritting your teeth and staying in the chains. Patience is the strength of a heart that can stay open in the presence of a wound without slamming the armor down and without binding the other in revenge. It is the capacity to bear the ache of an unpaid debt and choose not to keep it as a hostage. Feel the full heat of a real wrong and let it pass through clean instead of building it into a permanent structure in the chest. Patience is what makes covenant possible, because covenant requires two imperfect people to wound each other and forgive each other and stay open anyway, again and again, and only a patient heart can do that without either chaining the other or fleeing. The archangel the old framework names over the seat is Gabriel, the messenger of the deepest good news. What Gabriel is, a heart able to be joined in freedom, to forgive the blood debt, to belong without bondage, love as a son loves and not as a hostage. Sir, you should know what you are reaching for, what a freed heart actually feels like in the body, because if all you have ever known is the armored chest, you may not believe another way is possible. An armored heart is hard across the front, braced, cold, quick to plate over at the first hint of exposure, and it carries everywhere a low background readiness for betrayal, a bracing for the knife. A free heart feels nothing like that. A free heart is warm and open across the undefended without being naive, soft without being weak, able to let love move out and let love move in without the old toll of fear. It can be near another person without either disappearing into them or gripping them. It can hear a hard truth without slamming. It can be wounded even and feel the wound clean and let it pass and stay open anyway, because it is no longer guarding a debt or bracing for a betrayal it has already decided is coming. From a free heart, love is not a transaction and not a risk to be managed. What flows when the armor is down, and the man who lives from it is not less protected than the armored man. He is more, because he is held now by a covenant that no betrayal can break, and a heart held like that does not need to armor, because the thing it was always defending against, the loss of love, has already been answered by a love that cannot be lost. That is the target, not the open wound of the merging man, and not the cold serenity of the detached one, but the warm, undefended, freestanding heart of a man who can be joined because he is no longer afraid, soft in a hard world, not because he is foolish, but because he is finally, underneath everything, safe. I will not leave you with a beautiful idea and an unchanged body, because the oath above all is enforced in the flesh, in that armor over the heart, and that heat of old grievance in the chest, and a beautiful idea will not unbind it. So we put it in the body now, at the heart. Put your hand flat on the center of your chest, over the armor, over the ache, and bring to mind, without forcing it, one bond that has felt like a chain. It may be a person you cannot leave and cannot be free inside. It may be a grievance you have carried so long it feels like part of you. Blood debt you have been keeping, a wound you have kept open because closing it felt like surrender. Let it come and feel where it sits in the chest, the tightness, the heat, the plating. Do not try to fix it yet. Just keep of the chain and name it for what it is. This is an oath, this hostage bond. This is not my love and not my justice. The naming begins to loosen it, because the field works best unnamed, disguised as loyalty or as righteousness.
Then breathe into the center of the chest, behind the armor, and as you breathe, do the thing the field most fears, which is to release the blood debt. Not to say the wound did not happen, not to pretend the chain is not real, but to set down the hostage, to say, in the body and not only in the mouth, I release this debt. I am free to leave this, and from that freedom I choose. If it is a grievance, let the breath carry it out of the chest. not because the wrong did not matter, but because you will no longer keep the wound open to collect a payment that was bankrupting you and never touching them. If it is a bond, feel the difference between staying because you cannot leave and staying because you freely choose to, and notice that only the second one is love, and that you are allowed to want the second one, and then go deeper than any one bond, down to the inner oath underneath all of them. See if you can feel it, the old private vow, the never again you swore as a boy in the rubble of a love that failed you. Put your hand on it where it sits in the chest. Thank it, the way you would thank an old guard who stood at a gate for 30 years, because it kept something alive in you that needed keeping. And then release it. Say it in the body and not only in the mouth. I am not 7 anymore. I do not need this vow to survive. I release myself from the oath never to be vulnerable, never to need, never to let anyone close, and I give my heart permission to be joined again, in freedom, under a covenant that will not betray it. You may feel grief rise when you do this, and the grief is the armor softening, and you should let it come, because under the grief is the heart you swore off all those years ago, still alive, still able to love, waiting the whole time behind a gate you were finally brave enough to open. The armor will not drop all at once, plating that old does not. But every time you release a hostage, every time you choose a bond in freedom instead of enduring it in bondage, the heart opens 1 degree more, and the field gets a little less of you, and you move 1 step closer to the covenant your heart was aching for under all of it. And there is an old principle the framework names over this seat, the principle of correspondence, which says that the outer pattern reveals the inner structure, that the world of your relationships is a mirror of the condition of your own heart. Use it. The hostage bonds in your life are showing you the unhealed oath in your own chest, and as you break the oath within, by releasing the debts and choosing your bonds in freedom, the field of your relationships will begin, slowly, to change to match, because a free heart cannot help but change the bonds around it. Heal the inner covenant and the outer ones reorganize. That is the law of the heart, and the field has hidden it from you because it is the law that sets you free. We have reclaimed 4 seats now, the ground and the fire and the will and the heart, and the deception that comes next moves up to the throat, because once the field has bound a man's heart, it comes for his voice, for his very face. Having made him unable to be freely joined to others, it now teaches him to win their acceptance another way, by becoming false, by wearing a self that is not his own, by painting a face the crowd will approve of and burying the true one underneath it. I am going to show you that mask, and the art the watchers taught to make it, and the lie that you are only safe to be seen once you have become someone else in the next video. It is on the end screen now, and it begins exactly where this one ends, at the heart, rising toward the throat. For now, stay a moment longer with a heart that has begun, even slightly, to come out from behind its armor. Let it be enough that for the length of this hour, you set down 1 hostage, that you felt the difference between a bond that chains and a bond that frees, that you remembered your heart was built for covenant and not for captivity. You were never meant to be bound to anyone by guilt or grievance or blood debt. You were meant to be joined to them in freedom, and to be free, and to stay. Come forward now as a man whose bonds are chosen and not endured. Come forward as a man who can forgive the blood debt because he is held by a covenant that no betrayal can break. Come forward as the lover you were built to be, joined in freedom, ungovernable by any field that ever tried to sell you a chain and call it loyalty. If this is the work you came for, subscribe so the channel can walk the whole ascent with you, root to crown, 1 deception at a time. The next video, The Deception of the Mask, is waiting for you on the end screen. Begin there. Your heart was never meant to be held by a chain. It was waiting the whole time to be held by a covenant you were free to walk away from, and stayed.